Hi gang, you're watching Let's Level Up and my name is Rick. Today we're going to be talking about a two-player battle arena game where players will actually take a faction ruled by a titan and battle it out for one another for supremacy. The game really plays like a tug of war, and the game we're talking about is from Imbalanced Games and it's called Titans Tactics. Now essentially there are a few different factions in this game where a player will choose 3 champions from that faction. It's essentially one player's champions versus the other player's champions to see who can score the most damage or win momentum at least 3 times. I say it's like a tug of war because the game balance will be shifting back and forth as the round is played. We'll alternate a series of actions between my champions and your champions, or rather your champions and your opponent's champions, and at the end of the game there's a couple different win scenarios which I think is very unique. There's a lot of really cool tactics and really cool strategies that can be found in this game. There are a couple things that I think are questionable. However, overall I think it's a really unique game, and it's such a small box, and for a $25 MSRP you get a lot of money, or a lot of value rather, for that price tag. The components are very well designed. The box container and everything is very nice. I really like that. I also really enjoy the art. I saw some reviews kind of knocking the art, but I really enjoy the graphic art style. I think it's it fits very well within this game, particularly with the components and how everything is played. I like it. I saw some reviews where people kind of knocked the art style, but for me it was right on par, and I thought it made it stand out against some of the other battle arena games that are out there right now. This is kind of a lighter game, right? So this is only going to take about 30 minutes to play, even in a long scenario. There's a lot of replayability because there's so many different permutations and combinations between factions and champions that you can do, and then play against factions and champions, which is really nice. Overall, I like Titans Tactics. I think there's something to this game. I got to see it at Gen Con and I really enjoyed what I saw from there. So I'm happy to have it look here, rather give it a look here today, and we'll get it on the table and give you a little bit more in depth of how it's played, and then after that give you our final thoughts. So this is Titans Tactics, and in this game we're basically doing a 3-on-3 tug-of-war battle for supremacy. Now each player at the beginning of the game is going to choose a color or a faction. Each faction has its own unique theme to it, and the champions all kind of play a certain way. For instance, the black faction has a lot of strong ranged attacks that come with it, including a sniper, which I think is really neat. A lot of the factions have to deal with a certain titan. However, the black faction is unique in this regard that they don't actually have a titan that's controlling them. They're kind of out on their own and just crazy undead guys with guns, which I think is really neat. Now you can win the game 2 ways. One, you can get the balance token over to your X. Now you get to move the balance token in your direction each time you deal a damage. So if I deal 1 damage, I'm going to move the balance token 1 zone to me. The board is actually numbered 1 through 10 on both sides of the board. Here's where the tug of war comes in. If I deal a damage, I get 1 towards me for each point of damage I do. Let's say my opponent deals 3 damage to me. Well, it would go 1 back to the center and then 2, 3, landing on their 2 position. At the end of the turn, when all champions have activated, the player who has the most, has the balance in their favor, will get to move one of their victory markers up. If you get your victory marker, or rather you get 3 victory points, you will actually win the game outright. So it's either the first player to win 3 rounds, or as soon as you get your damage to the red X zone, which I think is a very unique mechanic that points out some interesting things in how this game is played. One, I can never permanently remove one of my opponent's champions, which is very interesting to me. That's just not something that's going to happen. So essentially what I'm trying to do is deal more damage and take less. Basically my opponent's trying to do the same thing. And it gives us a couple of unique things. Essentially the player with initiative is going to be able to activate a champion. You know they're activated by turning them over. Once they're activated, or rather while you're activating, you get to do 2 actions with each champion. Those actions can be movement, and there's movement in any way up to 2 spaces. Some champions have perks that allow them to do more movement, which is very neat. You can also use an action from your card, and we'll get into action cards here in a second, but each card has unique actions that you can do on it based upon a certain color. That's where the skill deck comes in, which we'll also get into a second. So as an action, I can actually use one of the skills on my card and do whatever the action says. Now, the actions all have a couple of different things that are important to note on there. One is range, and two is what the action ability actually does whenever you do it. After a unit or a champion has done both of their actions, you actually get to say whether you want to push or plan. Now, if you push with a champion, that means you get to do one additional action. If you plan, that means you get to draw 3 skill cards back into your hand. So let's talk about skill cards for a second. At the beginning of the game, you're going to be given, you're going to be given 3 cards of each color. So 3 white cards, 3 blue cards, 3 red cards, black cards, and 3 yellow cards, right? So each of these cards, you essentially get to draw at will whenever you'd like. There's no shuffling involved. There's no randomness in that regard. So whenever you have your initial starting hand of champions, or your starting 3 champions, you're going to want to put cards in your hand, up to 5, or rather 5 cards, that are relevant to the skills that you have in play. So you may want to take a white, a couple yellows, a red, and a black starting out, and that'll be your starting hand. So as long as you have a color associated with an ability on the Titan's card, you'll be able to use that. So let's say you wanted to use a blue ability on your card and you have this hand. Well, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do, and you can't use that blue ability because you don't have a corresponding color card that matches it. So that's where planning comes in. Planning allows you to take any 3 cards out of the deck and put them into your hand. So you're going to want to balance very carefully between pushing and planning during your actions, and each champion gets to make that decision whether they push or plan. So you have eventually 3 opportunities to do the same while you're playing the game, which again is a very interesting way things work. At the beginning of the game, we'll place 2 wall tokens, 1 for each player, anywhere on the map, as long as they don't overlap or cross out of a boundary or within the starting zone or black row here. Walls essentially only block movement. There's no line of sight in this game. So if I've got my cool sniper guy and he's behind a wall, I can shoot any of these guys here, assuming they're within range of his ability, which I don't necessarily agree with. I mean, let's not call it a wall, let's call it debris, and maybe that'll be more thematically accurate, right? So it's just something that's going to hamper movement rather than something that's actually going to prevent me from seeing through, like you would expect a wall to. Semantics aside, there's a lot of really interesting, exciting action that goes on in this game within the 30 minutes that we play it. So at most, we're playing probably 6 rounds. I mean, it's possible that both teams are at a stalemate at the end of the round, and the token does not adjust one way or the other. However, it's more likely that somebody's going to be able to eke out a victory of the round. So I think you can plan for 6 rounds of this game in a close game, 3 rounds in a not so close game, and maybe even 2 if you're not dealing any damage, but that's very unlikely. Let's talk a little bit about the individual factions and the abilities that they provide now. So let's talk about the 5 individual factions really quick. There's the Black Brigade with the black cards. There is the the Dreamers in the blue cards. There's the Crucible of the Order in the white cards. The Created in the red, which are a cool bestial faction. And then there's the Crew of the Returner, which is an interesting little space pirate type thing. Each of these cards have their own unique theme going into it. Let's specifically look really quick at the Black Brigade and kind of the anatomy of what makes a champion. Each champion is going to have a card associated with them and a token associated with them. The token is what's actually going to be placed on the game board. Along with the card, you're going to have, of course, the artwork associated with that, the faction symbol in the top right, the name of the of the card in the center here, and in the top left you're going to have the perk associated with that champion. Now each champion has a unique perk. So for instance, here we've got the Reaper aerial drone has got the winged perk. And the winged perk, it says when the champion moves, they can move 4 squares, they ignore walls and champions, and they do not suffer breakaway attacks. So the winged is a very unique perk. Whereas here we've got a marksman, a marksman perk here. And the marksman, it says ignore shroud tokens when targeting. So if you're targeting a creature within shroud and you have the marksman skill, you're okay. You're not going to have to worry about that. Here we have a unit with the Swift perk. The Swift perk allows champions to gain 1 additional activation or action when they activate. So this champion can activate 3 times rather than the normal 2 that they would get. And finally, we've got the Nimbus tank here. Sorry, I've got a couple others, but the Nimbus tank's the only other one with a unique perk here. And it has the Defender perk, which means it takes 1 less damage. So you reduce the damage taken on this by 1, which is very interesting. So let's take a look at the Nimbus tank in a little bit more detail to show you how the anatomy of the card is. So let's take a look at the 3 unique abilities associated with Nimbus Tank. First off, we have Sweep, and you can notice that each of these cards has a different color skill card we'd have to play to activate it, and they all have a unique name, of course the ability text, and then a range on what's applicable here. So the range here on this first one is Self, which means the Nimbus Tank is going to execute this ability from its own being. Now sometimes these are going to be attacks such as Sweep, where Sweep is going to deal 1 damage to all enemy champions within melee range. Sometimes these could be buffs or heals or things like that that would prevent damage or allow you to absorb damage, which could be very useful. The next ability we have is Drag. Drag is going to be a short-ranged attack. So that's up to 3 squares from where this current champion is. Now, if there was an infinity sign in between this marksmanship arrow here, that means it would be a long range, and that essentially means anywhere on the board they're allowed to hit. For example, we've got one here with our sniper. Let me find it. Yeah. So here we have the snipe ability, which has a long ranged ability there, and it just deals 1 damage to a target. So finally, he's got Hamstring, which is a melee based skill, and it costs a white. So let's say I want to use one of my actions here, and I go to my starting hand, which let's say I picked, for whatever reason, 3 blues and 2 reds. If I wanted to do Sweep, I would need to play a red and then execute my Sweep attack, which would again deal damage to any champion within that range. So these champions and the way that this skill system works is very unique and something that I find very interesting in the way that this game is played. There are several things within Titan's Tactics that I find very unique. The skill card system I think is unique. It allows us to basically strategize and forces us to ask questions or to put in a certain strategy in order to implement our game plan versus defending against the opponent's game plan, which I find very, very welcoming. I really enjoy that this is a quick game as well. I can play this multiple times during my lunch break and have unique experiences each time. Overall, I think Titan's Tactics is a very unique game, but I'd like you to follow us now with our afterthoughts. Well, that's it for Titan's Tactics. As you can see, this game has a lot of little things going with it. I'm not quite sure about the line of sight rule of it being no line of sight. I think walls should block line of sight. That's just me. And they basically act as movement barriers. But other than that, it's not something that I'm really going to put a lot of stock in when it comes to that first turn of placing walls down. I think walls should block line of sight, specifically with ranged attacks. It just makes sense. That is my only real gripe mechanically with how the game is played. I really love the different players with the perks and the champions and the different factions. Thematically, there's not a lot going on here, but I consider it a lot like chess, right? We don't really care about why one side's fighting the other side, only for the fact that they are. And I use chess as an analogy here because this game is strictly strategy based. So that means if I can have a better strategy than you, I will more often than not win this game. There's no luck involved. I will use my planning and I use my cunning to basically outwit or try to outmaneuver you, or score as much, more damage than you in a turn to win the game, which I think is interesting. I know generally when we're looking at games, we want a nice strategy versus luck as far as how games are played. So that way all players have the same base chances of winning a game, which it could be very interesting, right? But Titans Tactics provides some flair there, and for only $25, I think this game provides a lot of value for such a little box. So if you're interested in this, check out your local friendly local game store and see if they have a copy of Titans Tactics. Take a look at Imbalanced Games and see if they have something online where you can get it. And if you have any questions, of course, you can tweet us at Let's Level Up. All of our social media information is available at letslevelup.net. We really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And most importantly, game on.